State Historical Society, and this is our monthly brown bag lecture. We'd like to thank the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation for the funds to film these presentations and make them available on Channel 5. This month, to help commemorate National Hispanic Heritage Month, which is September 15th through October 15th, our speaker today is Nebraska State Historical Society trustee Jose Garcia from Omaha. A native of Kansas City, Jose is one of the founding members of the Mexican-American Historical Society. And today, Jose will talk about Nebraska's Spanish-American experience. Jose.
Good afternoon. I'm Jose Francisco Chato, the name my mother gave me, Garcia de los Rios, which is my mother's maiden name also, which I carried into Nebraska when I arrived in 1976. We're going to cut to the chase and go straight to the PowerPoint presentation and maybe give you a little bit about my background at a later time. What I have here is a presentation called Spanish-Mexican Presence in the Plains. And we're going to go right to the 471st year, almost the day one of that history. Of course, the first 199 years, this is what the territory looks like on a map that represents the extent of the Spanish Empire in North America. This, of course, doesn't include anything south of the Rio Bravo River, but these is an interpretation of what the territory was up until approximately the Louisiana Purchase. Here's another map that was part of the cartographer's vision of America. This is a rather correct map that shows Hispana Nova up in the north and all of the cities that were becoming Hispanic Spanish settlements in the late 16th century. Here is a map that the French put out that shows the French influence in North America. And I'm showing you these images mostly to give you an idea as to what the conquistadores, what the explorers, those that came to the North American continent from Europe were looking at and were using as their guides into the continent. And we'll go first with the subject matter of the northern frontier of Spain, the Spanish Conquest. The spine of this, the actual road, the artery from the heart of the Spanish Empire, Mexico City, came up the Camino Real, the road north. And primarily it was a road that branched out from Mexico City, went through Monterrey, and then began various types of arteries that went both west and east. But primarily, the main, Santa Fe was the main destination of those that took the trek from Mexico City north to the North American continent, past the Rio Bravo River, which is now called the Rio Grande. This road was the commerce, this was the artery. This was the way that conquistadores, that traders, that explorers took into the North American continent. Coronado was one of the first types of explorers and conquerors that ran north from Mexico City. This picture is a picture I took at the Plainsman Museum in Aurora. I was rather surprised to see a mural depicting Coronado comes to the plains in 1541. And one of these days I'll be able to get a better picture and work with the staff there so I can show it to the public. This was a carretera, which was one of the primary pieces of technology that was used to run north out of Mexico into the Great Plains. The Mexican carretera was the primary mode of transportation into the plains up until the wagoneers started making their wagons in Pennsylvania, in Missouri. Some of them doing over 36,000 pounds of freight. But this carretera was the first wheel vehicle that began supplying the mode of transportation to those that wanted to go north from the Hispanic Mexico. And I'm running on there we go. Let's try this again. Here again is another map that is probably the youngest map that we have found in the 1520s that provides a kind of a contorted view of the North American continent. And I keep showing maps because this grounds me into what was being expected by people after Christopher Columbus, who of course wanted to find India, as you will find in the top left side of the map. It wasn't there, of course. These things were a figment of many imaginations. They had a basic connection to medieval Europe, which at the time represented the culture, the stimulus that came out of Spain primarily in going after the riches and the civilizations that were being encountered in Mexico, in Peru, and Bolivia, and anywhere within the south, central, and southern North American continent. I'm showing you this calendario. It's a perpetual calendar that was found in the Wildcat Hills as a image of a material object that was identified to the Spanish exploration, the Spanish commerce that was going on in the plains. Here is another example of what was being used, pieces of 8, as trade items, as payment for trades, as gifts to the indigenous population that Spanish explorers, Spanish merchants encountered in the Great Plains as they started moving up the Camino Real and branching east from Santa Fe. Here is another very well-known object that is almost like a graffiti type of a rock carving that was found in Sheridan County back in 1972. It hasn't really been authenticated, but it's there for further observance of archaeological interest in the Spanish presence within this area. Another influence that the Spaniards had on the North American continent were the horses. This map represents a distribution of how the horses began coming into North America in the 1600s and eventually made their way north, immensely impacting the indigenous population of the Pawnee, of the Kiowa, the Comanche, of the Cheyenne, of the Sioux, and making its way all the way up to northern, what it will become the United States and southern Canada in 1750, when the Cree began using horses for primarily warfare, as well as adjusting the horses to their nomadic life as carriers of teepees and other manners of transportation. This was one of the primary technological contributions that the Spaniards made in the development of what we now know as the United States. We go to France now. Trouble with France, trade and explorations in the Great Plains. And one of the motivations for the Spaniards of becoming involved in an area of the Great Plains was that they began hearing that French traders were becoming involved with indigenous tribes for trade, whether it being for the fur or whether it being other types of goods. And in 1720, the Villa Sur expedition was expedited out of Santa Fe. And let me tell you, this expedition in 1720, the man that headed it, a general of Villasur, was as incompetent of a man as you can find to launch such an expedition. And he took quite a lot of people out of Santa Fe, to include soldiers, clerics, and Pueblo people of the community, to figure out what the French were doing in the eastern part of what they claimed to be Spanish territory. And this was a route that they took into the Nebraska, what it would become Nebraska and the Platte River area. From Santa Fe, they went to Taos. They stopped at the Cuartelejo, which was a verified archaeological site in southwestern Kansas. Going up the Republic River and then crossing it, and somewhere in the Columbus, Nebraska area, they encountered a large gathering of Pawnee and what seems to be a French element. This is a historical marker that was presented to the Columbus area by the State Historical Society that basically reflects what happened to this military force that was led by Pedro de Villasur in the Columbus area. Now, there are several other interpretations as to where this expedition ended up. Most people believe that it did end up in the confluence of the Loup River and the North Platte, somewhere in the Columbus, Nebraska area. All of this can be read in the Nebraska History magazine, spring of 1993. When I read this magazine, this piqued my interest in Nebraska history and the Hispanic element that I couldn't find anywhere else. It was the Nebraska History magazine that brought this to the surface for this man. And in this magazine, it shows a depiction of a hide that became an art object. Some unknown painter, unknown artist, depicted the battle that resulted in the Villasur massacre. And as you can see, the Spanish are in the middle, completely overwhelmed and dominated by the Pawnee, who many of them are naked, mostly because of their belief that they would be protected by the gods that they worshipped and idolized. There is also figures that seem to be French, but here again, none of this has ever been authenticated. What I do know of the Segasur hide, of which is the name of this artistic endeavor, is that it is now in the New Mexico Museum of History, and it was bought for something like $5 million. The Joslin Museum and the other museums in Nebraska made an attempt to purchase the hide, to bring it to Nebraska, but the money was just a huge amount. Here's another close-up of that hide. It shows the Spaniards taking on casualties and basically being slaughtered by the elements, the Pawnee elements that attacked them in 1720. This, in effect, stopped most of the dreams that the Spaniards had in influencing trade and influencing development of settlements in the Great Plains. After the Villasur massacre, they had more troubles than they could handle and basically pulled back. And it wasn't until the early 19th century when they started hearing that the United States was interested in developing an economy, of bringing the United States influence into the indigenous tribes within territories that the Spaniards considered to still be theirs, despite the Louisiana Purchase and despite the fact that they really didn't have anyone inhabiting or settling these territories that were east of Santa Fe and into the Kansas and Nebraska area. This is a depiction of a soldier that was sent by the Spaniards to intercept people like Zebulon Pike, like the Lewis and Clark expedition in the 1804-1806 area. A large gathering of soldiers, expedition of soldiers, encountered indigenous people around the Republican River area. This man here, Lieutenant Melgares, was the leader of this band of about 60 soldiers. But they were advised that you need to leave here, and we do not welcome you, and you are not here for our good. And between 1804 and 1806, the Spaniards really could not find a way of stopping what was to become a mandate by the United States to begin populating, to begin initiating trade in the area of the Great Plains. And this was the area where the Spaniard army, the Spaniard expeditionary forces came to meet with indigenous people, Red Cloud, Guide Rock being some of the settlements in the area. And here, this map here shows of what the United States looked like in the early 19th century. As you can see, the huge expanse that France claimed as Louisiana, the Spanish area towards the south, and all this changed in the early part of the 19th century when the United States, seen on the right side, began pushing themselves into the area of the Mississippi River, crossing it, and exploring the Missouri River Basin through the Lewis and Clark expedition and the Zebulon Pike types of expeditions into the Great Plains. Manuel Lisa was the next person that I see that was influential in the development of this part of the world and supporting the United States' efforts to bring the nation into the Great Plains. Manuel Lisa, to me, is quite a representative of a pioneer. He was born in New Orleans of Spanish parents, and he made his living on the Missouri River supporting trade with the indigenous people, mostly furs. He founded some rather large fur trading operations. He helped outfit the initial Lewis and Clark expedition, although there was quite a lot of bad blood between the initiators, something that I am not very, I haven't studied that fully enough to really talk about it, but I knew that there was transactions between Lewis and Clark's company and the expedition. He was responsible for bringing Mary, who was Manuel Lisa's third wife, into the territory, making her the first white woman to live in the area that would be called Nebraska. Manuel Lisa's likeness is here shown very romantically attached to the Omaha tribe, the Winnebago tribe, as a very, what can I say, a pastoral man of helping indigenous people, in this depiction, raise pumpkins. But in fact, Manuel Lisa his influence was much wider than helping indigenous people raise gardens, which they had been doing before the arrival of Manuel. Of what I know about Manuel Lisa, he was very, very instrumental in making sure that indigenous people in the area, of which he became an Indian agent for the United States government, kept the United States, support for the United States strong among indigenous people during the War of 1812. I believe Manuel Lisa had a great deal of involvement with this. And of course, him and a man named Pilcher had built a fort up around the North Omaha area, somewhere where the airport now is, a little further towards maybe Mandan Park. I haven't really found a specific area to where Fort Lisa, which was the second fort. He had built other forts up in the Montana area. But when he came back downstream, him and Mr. Pilcher, who would later be credited with founding the town of Bellevue, gathered their resources into a fort that was no longer part of the history. It isn't there. Nobody has really found any archaeological evidence of the fort. Hopefully, there'll be some efforts in this endeavor in the future. Another thing that I know about Manuel Lisa is that he has been given credit by some people. Now, here again, this is all really, this has never been established as truth, of naming Bellevue as the Bella View in Spanish. Bellevue is an area, a settlement that he looked from a. If you know Bellevue, there are huge hills that you can go up and overlook the Missouri River Valley. And I could envision Manuel Lisa going up in one of these hills and saying, what a beautiful view. But here again, this is something that certain people have brought up, giving Manuel Lisa credit for naming the city of Bellevue. I run through Manuel Lisa quickly, and I start coming up as far as the Spanish influence in Nebraska to the urban setting, to South Omaha, Nebraska. And this is quite a chunk of time. I'm talking almost 100 years. Within these 100 years, the Mexican, the Spaniard effect on the development of Nebraska, the territory, along with the state, were traders. There were quite a lot of Mexican traders that used both the Oregon and the Santa Fe Trail to run through Nebraska up to the east. More of them were using the Southern Trail to run through Leavenworth and Independence and then Westport in Kansas City to initiate trade. I have also found in the record that many Mexican traders were buying their wagons in Missouri and using these wagons for long caravans that went into Mexico. I found a note in a Missouri document that, as an example, that white merchants also, European merchants, would buy wagons, huge wagons that would run 20 or 30,000 pounds of freight, and take them deep into Mexico for trade and come back over an 8,000-mile journey. So there was quite a lot of osmotic activity between Mexican traders, the Mexican economy, and the wagon train culture, the freight culture that began coming in from the east in droves. So it wasn't just pioneers that were on these covered wagons, these Conestoga wagons, these prairie schooners, but a large amount of freight that went south and southwest. And I come to South Omaha. Porkopolis was one of the nicknames, Magic City. This is the way South Omaha looked in 1893. From about 22nd Street, but 26th Street, looking down into the valley. And of course, what happened, it developed into the largest facility of slaughtering cattle in the United States, if not the world. There were huge companies such as Armour, Cudahy, that developed a business in South Omaha that became a magnet for workers. In the early parts of this industry, there was a need for workers that was filled by Ellis Island, by immigrants that came in from Russia, more so from Italy, from Poland, from Czechoslovakia. Hundreds of thousands of people came to this part of the United States to work in the late 19th and early 20th century. And of course, a city was born in the area of the packing houses called South Omaha, Nebraska. This building still stands in South Omaha. As you can see, there was railway traffic that went as far as 24th and Lake in these days. Now, I'm going to go real quick to another influence that came about because of a relationship with a Mexican person in Nebraska, and his name was Juan Gonzalez. In 1915, during this time where there was quite a lot of Mexican people that were coming into the Nebraska area to work in the packing houses, some of them to work in the railroads, but mostly in the packing industry. Well, in 1915, something occurred which was reported in this article by Michael de la Garza in the Nebraska State Historical Magazine that I believe set the tone to how Nebraskans, which was now which had already had at this time taken over South Omaha. In 1915, South Omaha became part of Omaha, Nebraska. The man pictured here, Detective Ring, was given the job of investigating a robbery, a burglary of railroad property. And he went to this flop house somewhere on North 15th Street in downtown Omaha and encountered two people in their rooming house. The end result of this altercation was that he was shot and killed. Mr. Ring was shot and killed, which then set a manhunt that was unknown in the annals of Nebraska up to this time. Omaha was at this time one of the largest markets, if not the biggest market in the world, as the Omaha Bee here reports. Workers were occupied in hogs and cattle, in any kind of activity that produced beef, that produced meat for the American economy. There were quite a lot of Mexican people that began coming up from Juarez. There were direct railroad connections in El Paso through Kansas City and then radiating into Chicago and up north. And a few of us, my family ended up in Kansas City around officially in 1921. But in the Mexican Revolution during the 1910-1920 time period, an enormous amount of people began moving north because of the need for labor, because of the need to live in a place where it wasn't being torn apart by war. During this time, Nebraska was really pumping. They were really becoming a very important economy in the future of the United States. As you can see here in a picture that was taken on Farnham and 15th Street during the 1915 time period. And this is a headline in the Omaha Bee: police hunting Ring slayer in downtown area. There was a house-to-house search. Over 100 Mexicans were arrested and taken into custody as a result of this dragnet looking for this man that purportedly shot and killed Officer Ring. This man here was a police chief in Omaha, Mr. Henry Dunn, and he began sending squads of officers radiating out of Nebraska looking for this man. It shows that maybe 300 people were involved in a posse looking for Juan Gonzalez. This is a state-of-the-art squad car in the 1909-1915 time period that were sent everywhere with a whole load of police, of people that were in the posse looking for Juan Gonzalez. And then they caught up with him in Schuyler, Nebraska. This man here, Charles Van Dusen, a very close friend and colleague of Tom Ring, the man that was shot and killed, he was the one that confronted Gonzalez and in Schuyler. And somehow or another, Mr. Gonzalez was shot and killed by a yet even now unknown party. And the posse brings down the Mexican who shot Ring. Murder of Detective Tom Ring, killed in Scribner, Nebraska. This kind of sets the stage in the relationships that Nebraskans had for a population that wasn't really moving up the scale as were the Polish, as were the Germans, as were the Czechs. The Mexicans began coming into the area in the early 20th century. This happened, and the writer of this article claims that there were quite a lot of bad feeling, quite a lot of feelings among the dominant culture that Mexicans were illiterate, were boozers, were not dependable, and were lazy. This definitely reinforced this attitude in the area. And one wonders, as this man did in his article, of how this attitude towards minority people reflected on what happened in 1919 in the lynching that happened in front of the courthouse here in Omaha, Nebraska. So there is a direct connection, I believe, with what happened to Mr. Gonzalez and what happened in 1919. And the influence of Mexican people just kept happening. These are papers of a Mexican person in 1918, the Huerta family, as a matter of fact, that came up from areas in Mexico to make a living. Official documents of people that wanted to make Nebraska their home, the state of Nebraska their home. Now, in the meantime, Nebraskans who were developing quite a large society, a society of the Quivira, Coronado and Quivira. Exarban is a very important part of the history of Omaha, Nebraska. And they kept the myth of Coronado and Quivira alive. As you can see here from a 1922 program during the Knights of Exarban time period. The myth, which is totally a myth, Coronado, for all practical purposes, really didn't come into the Nebraska territory. He may have made it as far as the Republican River. For sure, some of the people that he sent to Recointer, I believe that's how you pronounce that word, did make it up to the Republican River area. But in effect, Coronado really never saw Nebraska or never saw the Platte. But it's still a mythology that is a very safe and secure mythology of things that are Spanish. And it was alive and well in Omaha, Nebraska in 1922. But in 1928, the Mexican population began to organize. And what you see here is a more contemporary picture. This picture was taken around the middle 1940s of an organization called the Mutualista Mexicana of Omaha. Now, the Mutualista Mexicana was an organization much like a mutual aid society, to where they took dues and they helped people get over unemployment. They helped bodies go back to the homeland. And they also were given the duty of doing the patriotic events, similar to a 4th of July. Well, Mexican people had 15th of September, 16th of September, Mexican Independence Day, which South Omaha had a commemoration last week. They also did Cinco de Mayo. This group of men, which most of them were railroad workers along with packing house workers, organized in 1928. In 1935, they had a Cinco de Mayo activity at the Social Settlement, which was, I believe, at this time at 25th and what is now L Street, where the Polish home is now. They had, or in this area, I haven't really gotten to the specific place, but in 1935 there was a Cinco de Mayo in Omaha, Nebraska. If in fact in 1935 the Mutualista, the Mexican Mutualista Society, also had a school to teach Mexican children the English language and cultural and civic duties that they had in America. The school was called La Escuela Lázaro Cárdenas. And I need help in finding data and documents that will make this claim, the specific claim that I only find in writing, suitable. But the Mutualista was very, very active in helping the community of Mexicans that was growing and growing and growing. This is a program. Now, notice how they spell Nebraska. Actually, this is a Spanish interpretation of Nebraska. It's an incredible document that the Mexican American Historical Society has among its holdings. This is another document from 1942 at the social settlement. La Sociedad Mutualista Mexicana had another program, and as you can see, very involved program of both Mexican and American hymns, of lectures, of folk dancing. They even had an orchestra that was playing the music of the day in 1942. This one here was at the Jocelyn Memorial in 1937. Here again, of the Sociedad Mutualista Mexicana, doing Spanish dances, along with Danish people, Serbian people, Czech people, and Romanian people. This was kind of like the precursor of the ethnic festival that Omaha had when I came to town in the late 70s. And it's too bad that it isn't going on now. This was back in 1937. The population began marrying. This picture was taken in front of the storefront church that was Our Lady of Guadalupe in South Omaha, up around where Eddie's is now, if anyone knows Omaha. The church was established in 1919 to take care of the Mexican inhabitants of South Omaha. And they continued as a storefront church until 1952, when their real church, Our Lady of Guadalupe, was built by Peter Kiewit, as a matter of fact. People were working in the packing houses. Vidal Barrientos, one of the original families in South Omaha. Having children. The first generation began being, the second generation, the second and third generation began being born in South Omaha, in Scotts Bluffs, in Minotaur, in Grand Island, not in Grand Island as much, even though there are families, the Soto family that has very deep roots in Grand Island. A Briseño from the Soto, that married into the Soto family, as an example, in Grand Island, is credited by many people as being the first one to use irrigation in his farm. Now, I'm working at substantiating that, but there is a trail that leads some people to believe that he was one of the first to use irrigation in the state of Nebraska. The culture began to thrive. This picture was taken in South Omaha in the Tampico bar back in the late to middle 30s. Look at those great signs. And the calendar in the background in Spanish, probably from a Kansas City. Another bit of information about this part of the Mexican society in South Omaha is that they were kept from having any heavy commercial activity in South Omaha. I don't know if this was the case in Lincoln or Grand Island or Minotaur or Scotts Bluffs, but I do know that in South Omaha, it was difficult, if not impossible, to have a grocery store, as an example. To buy your tortillas, to buy your mole, to buy your corn husk, to buy all of the ingredients you need to make Mexican food. Most of the people went to Kansas City to buy their chilies and to buy what you need to make tortillas. And this was a case until about the 40s and 50s, when a man named Aguilera and another man named Lano Oropesa began making inroads into the commercial and the social infrastructure of South Omaha and Omaha in particular. Here's a Cinco de Mayo celebration, and the reason I know it is because of Benito Juarez's picture on the top right on the wall. He is the primary president that is idolized during Cinco de Mayo. Two of these people are still alive on the left side, and the second from left is a very important man, Lano Oropesa. He was the one that blew open quite a lot of discriminatory practices in hotels, in restaurants, in places of lodging when he organized, here, let me go a little ahead, when he organized baseball teams and basketball teams to play other teams throughout the state of Nebraska. And this is a picture of that activity back in 1941. I think I messed the guys up in the truck by doing that, by jumping around. But what I'm trying to show here is that the Mexican-American, which is now a Mexican-American community, these people were born in the United States of America. This is in 1941. These second generation guys are about 19 to 21 years old. So they were born not necessarily in Omaha, but in the United States between 1915 and 1925. So you're already seeing a substantial population of Mexican-American people that began bringing roots into the social, economic, and cultural landscape of Nebraska. Here's another picture of 1941 of a men's club in South Omaha. All of these families still have people in Nebraska, every single one of these families. And then you go into the 50s. Lano Oropesa, you see him again on the right side. He continued organizing athletic types of activities. This happens to be part of a team for the bar that he was running on 10th Street, which was a little bit away from the old Burlington station back in those days. In 1953, we have a basketball team that played St. Joseph, Missouri. St. Joe won 44-38 at St. Joe. Look at all the Mexican people in the background. This is at St. Joe, Missouri now. So you can tell that the Mexican-American population was firmly established, playing teams in Kansas City and Chicago, in Des Moines, all over the Midwest as a Mexican team, primarily because they still couldn't play in Nebraska athletic facilities. So they had to go play in somebody else's house. And the American GI Forum was founded in Omaha. This basically was the linchpin to the civil rights movement of the Mexican-American prior to the Chicano movement that began in the 70s. The American GI Forum was founded by Hector P. Garcia, and it is a civil rights organization of veterans such as myself that are interested in furthering the American way, furthering the ability of being equal in the society that you live in. There's quite a story to the American GI Forum. And it was founded in Omaha, Nebraska in the middle 1950s. These are some of the original founders of that organization. And as I go on through the 70s now, this man here, a Lutheran minister by the name of Reverend Ramon Navarro, is the most important element of change that Nebraskans, Mexican-American community has seen to date. Reverend Navarro was a rural, Lutheran rural minister that started finding a population of Mexican Americans that were 3 and 4 generations deep in South Omaha now. They were having problems getting their kids graduated. They were having problems of properly educating their high school kids into respectable jobs, and absolutely nobody was going to the university during the late 1960s. Reverend Navarro began organizing. As a result of this man's activity, the formation of the Indian Chicano Health Clinic, which is now One World, a big multi-million-dollar health provider, was founded. The Mexican American Commission, which is now the Latino American Commission of Nebraska, was founded. The Chicano Awareness Center, which is now the Latino Center for the Midlands, was founded. All of these things happened within a 3-year period of time, and it was a result of the Chicano movement that was motivated and powered by 2 things: a lack of identity by the Mexican-American populations of who they were, and the fact that we were all Americans and we all need to be treated equal. And the representation of people like this was absolutely essential. And I'm getting to the end of my presentation here. How much more time do I have? 15 minutes. I bring this in because my wife and I are part of Las Artes Cultural Center. And we don't have our own organization. I'm saying we don't have our own facility. So we rent wherever we can find a place. And Las Artes Cultural Center is our nomadic home, as we can say. But we have been instrumental in helping, as an example, the Sheldon Art Museum initiate their Dia de los Muertos exhibition that started 5 years ago. We shepherded them through 2 years of that development. And the reason I'm telling you this is that there isn't anywhere in Nebraska, or if in fact in the United States, where you don't see the influence of Spanish people. Whether it's taking care of your children or figuring out whether it's English or Spanish when you dial the telephone. Spanish language, Spanish culture, Spanish people are a fixed element of the United States of America. 55 million to the last count. Linda and I, who are Chicanos, we cut our teeth on the Chicano movement of the late 60s, early 70s. We, in effect, became teachers. I went out to get my degree. Linda got her degree at St. Mary's, College of St. Mary's in Omaha. And we proceeded to identify with, number one, being Americans first. I'm a Vietnam vet, and basically as American as apple pie. Linda is a third generation. Her parents were migrant workers. If in fact, when they moved into Omaha, their neighborhood where they moved into ran a petition trying to make them move. And this was in the 60s, for crying out loud. So we cut our teeth in this kind of environment. It was no different than other generations of Russians, of Germans, of Czechs, of Irish, of Italians that came to the United States. Each ethnic group needed to find a way of getting along in a nation filled with immigrants. And it's no different now. There's so much polarity now. What I'm showing you here is more of a picture book story of what is really happening. This is more of a look into a world that hasn't really been well documented and studied. And the reason Linda and I created the Mexican American Historical Society of the Midlands is to try to gather all of this information into a credible presentation of history, of Mexican American history, of a history that is interpreted, gathered, and archived by those that lived it, by those that are being affected by it. And this is the reason I'm here in front of you. This is the reason I became a trustee with the Nebraska State Historical Society. I'm a retired Union Pacific employee. I did 25 years railroading. So I have benefited from the bounty of the United States of America. I have gone to war for this country. My father, my uncle was a World War II veteran. I had 3 uncles that fought in Korea. So it isn't the motivational factor of what we do here as a cultural activist, because I don't like calling myself a historian, because I don't have degrees up and down my back. You know, I have a BA in psychology out of the University of Missouri at Kansas City. But we are cultural historians. We do know how to take the experiences of our mothers and fathers and bring them into a sensible presentation of American history. And this is why I put on this presentation a history of 499 years. We have been around that long. We didn't have to get on a boat to come to this continent. Now, of course, my ancestors on the Spaniard side certainly did. But I have an indigenous side. here I go trying to find out who I am genetically. And about 3 years ago, I received a phone call, and I was told, Jose Garcia, there is a whole huge half of your family that you don't even know about. And by the way, your great-great-grandfather was born in this little what we call Milpa, a little village in Mexico, in 1835, and you're carrying his name. So these roots that my experience as a human being, as a Chicano, are very deep in the continent. They're very deep. They could go back to the 15th century, the early 16th century when the Spaniards came. Well, obviously they do, because I don't look like my Uncle Joe Grandote, is what I call it. He is a pure Tarahumara Indian from Chihuahua. You know, I don't look like him, but he married into the family. And now the 5th and 6th and 7th generation are as brown as you can be. I married a woman, Linda Garcia, who is very brown. And now she's having he's having children, having married a Lincoln person, by the way. I am connected to Lincoln now, for crying out loud. You may know some of the people. They're hairdressers in town. The Murrays. Does anybody know the Murray family here in Lincoln, Nebraska? They have 2 beautiful daughters, and one's as brown as you can be, and the other one is as blonde as you can be. And this is a mirror of who we are. You go to Mexico, you find very, very blonde people in Mexico. You know, it's not only because of the French incursion of the early 1860s, but it's also because of the strong relationship Mexico has always had with Germany. To this day, the German people control and own many of the coffee plantations. They call them fincas in Mexico, as an example. But I'm going a little bit away from my presentation. I have 5 minutes, and I would like to entertain questions now.
What's your definition of a Chicano?
A Chicano
Yeah.
is made, not born. Yes, we do have to be born in the United States of Mexican parents, but most people that are of that persuasion either call themselves Americans, which we all do, or Mexican Americans, which is the hidden population that is going on right now. All of the media is using Latino, Hispanic, all these other adjectives. It's truly a Mexican American population. Over 60% of the people have Mexican, very deep first, second generation Mexican roots in this country. Being a Chicano means that we teach, that we go out and we take what we know and we share what we know. Over the last 35 years, as an example, we've amassed literally thousands of volumes, papers, books, into a library that we want to present to the public as time goes on, as an example. That's being a Chicano. But we made that bridge from being a Chicano to what I call the status quo about 3 years ago, when we took all of our movement activity, all of our collecting, all of our knowledge that we have been able to acquire over the last years of our lives, and we organized a corporation because we wanted to invite people into what we are and who we represent. But that didn't take away the fact that we're still Chicanos. Please. Thank you.
When did, like in the Panhandle, Scottsbluff, when did a lot of the Hispanics start coming for like sugar beets?
Yes.
Were they more of a, just they're seasonal, or is there a lot that are still living?
My goodness, the Western Nebraska has had its history of ethnic people, from the Greeks to the Chinese to the Japanese, and then to the Mexicans, as a result of primarily the revolution in Mexico. There's still a huge population in the Scottsbluffs area. I was out there recently, and they had their Oregon Trail Days, and there must have been 5 floats of Mexicans, American people. If in fact in Scottsbluffs they organized the first Mexican-American Historical Society, and in the park, in Pioneer Park, there is a building that was built by a Mexicano from the Huerta family that still stands and is a testament to how we're trying and working towards making Nebraska our home. Questions? Yes.
Jose, how old were you when you left Kansas City to come to Nebraska?
Well, let's see, 76. I was born in 45. 36, something like that.
Could you compare the interaction of the Mexican Americans in Kansas City versus?
Well, wonderful question. Wonderful question. Yes, I can. In Kansas City, we didn't have any problems with patching our knees. The Mexican Americans in Kansas City were a formidable lot of people. We had organizations, we had commerce, we had businesses, social and otherwise. And we held our heads up proud, and we're going to went about our business as equals. Now, not that I didn't find equality in Nebraska when I entered in 76, but I did find a certain residue of the 50s and 60s to where children were demanded by not only the system, but their parents to be Americans. And that meant that you needed to do English, like we did in Kansas City. You needed to eat English, like we did. And some people, you needed to change your names, like I did. My kindergarten teacher changed my name from Chato to Joe Frank. In Kansas City, I'm still known as Joe Frank Garcia, you know. So there was a distinct difference. Whereas in Kansas City, we had our grocery stores and 5 tortillerias and Mexican fiestas since the 30s. In fact, Kansas City has the oldest social action agency that benefits Spanish-speaking people in the United States. I come to Omaha, there was none of those things. There were the GI Forum, and there was a church, and there were a strong segment of the community, but it was a fortress-like type of a system, to where this is where they felt who they were, but it was very enclosed and very, could I say, parochial. It wasn't like in Kansas City. Our fiestas, the whole city came to our fiestas. Everybody came to our grocery stores to buy Mexican food. I come to Omaha, and it was rather segregated, more so than I've ever experienced in an urban environment. I'm running out of time. Well, we're going to wrap it up. Here again, I want to present myself as Jose Garcia. My mother was Isabel Rios. My father is Ruben Garcia. I'm third generation Chicano, and I really feel honored and very grateful that I have been given this opportunity to talk about who I am and who I represent, and the fact that I am a Nebraskan. I want to thank everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll do this again. Oh, nobody ate their lunch. I mean, we could go on.